Here are 15 more Bible contradictions, all straight from the text.
Okay, for two things to contradict themselves, they must both mean the same thing in the same way in both instances. If I say, for example, the stove is hot, and you say the stove is cool, one of us has to be incorrect, right? Unless you mean that the stove is cool. One of us is using a word to refer to the temperature of the stove, and the other is using a word to refer to its appearance.
Psalm 30:5 says, his anger lasts only a moment. Jeremiah 17:4 says, my anger will burn forever.
In Psalm 30, God is referring to his disposition toward his saints or his holy ones. He says his anger lasts for a moment, and then joy comes in the morning. And we understand that, don't we? I mean, it's hard to stay mad at your kids, isn't it? In Jeremiah 17, God is referring to his disposition toward the wicked. He will be angry at them forever. So these two verses don't contradict each other. A contradiction would be God saying to his saints in Psalm 30, I will be angry at you for only a moment, and then saying, I will be angry at you forever. Or God saying to the wicked in Jeremiah 17, I will be angry at you forever, and then saying, I will be angry at you for only a moment.
Genesis 22:1 says, God did tempt Abraham. James 1:13 says, God tempts no one. So which one is lying?
A better word would be test, and some translations use that word. And if you look at the context of both passages, you'll see that's what is being talked about. Testing, not tempting. To tempt is to entice, to test is to measure.
Exodus 32 says God changed his mind about destroying Israel. Numbers 23 says God is not a man that he should change his mind.
We need to remember that the Bible is written from an observer perspective. So there are times when it appears, say, God is angry with Israel and he's going to wipe Israel out. And then Moses goes and prays and apparently changes God's mind from our perspective, right? But in reality, what's going on is that God always knew that Moses would pray, and he always knew that he would relent based on what Moses had done. It's written from an observer perspective. And that's the way we do things as well. We use an observational language, and the Bible uses it the same way. So God is not changing, we're changing, and God is always angry with sin, and he's always pleased with trust in him.
Genesis 32:30 says, I have seen God face to face. John 1:18 says, no one has ever seen God. That's a direct contradiction.
But Jacob didn't see God. He saw the angel of the Lord and wrestled with him.
Romans calls him the God of peace. Exodus calls him a man of war.
Like Trump, LOL. Actually, historically, the way to achieve peace is very often through war.
2 Samuel says God made David take a census. 1 Chronicles says Satan did. So which is it, divine command or demonic influence?
So this is two different writers recounting the same story. One writer said Satan did it, the other said God did it. Question, who does Satan belong to? God. And God often uses Satan to test his people. Not to tempt, but to test. And the test is not for God's benefit, of course, but for ours. That's what James argues in James 1.
1 Samuel says David killed Goliath. 2 Samuel says Elhanan killed Goliath. You'd think they'd remember who killed their biggest villain.
1 Chronicles 25 says Elhanan actually killed Goliath's brother.
Genesis 7 says the flood lasted 40 days. A few verses later, it says the waters prevailed 150 days.
It rained for 40 days. The earth was covered by water for 150 days.
Genesis 6 says Noah took 2 of every animal. Genesis 7 says 7 pairs of each clean animal.
Yes, they had to have something to eat on the ark and afterward when the ark found land.
Exodus 33:20 says no man can see God and live. Exodus 32:11 says God spoke to Moses face to face. Same chapter.
That's Exodus 33:11 actually, and it didn't mean Moses saw God face to face, only that he spoke to him in an intimate way. We know this because 9 verses later, Moses, while speaking to God face to face, says, "Let me see your face," and God says, "No man can see my face and live."
Matthew says Peter would deny Jesus 3 times before the rooster crows. Mark says before it crows twice.
But if a cock crows 3 times, it also crows 2 times, doesn't it?
Matthew says Joseph's father was Jacob. Luke says it was Heli.
Luke was writing primarily for the benefit of Greeks, so he naturally used a lot of Greek names in his gospel.
Exodus 20 lists the 10 commandments everyone knows. Exodus 34 lists a completely different set, ending with "don't boil a goat in its mother's milk." And that's the one actually called the 10 commandments in the text.
In Exodus 32, God wrote on the stone tablets, and Moses in his anger broke them. In Exodus 34, God tells Moses, "This time you're going to write them out, and I will dictate what I want you to write." And God included some other laws and instructions in addition to the 10 commandments. That's what Exodus 34 says.
2 Kings says Jehoiakim became king at 18 years old. 2 Chronicles says 8.
He inherited the throne at 8. He was inaugurated as king at 18. He was like the king-elect for 10 years because nobody wants an 8-year-old king. Think about it.
2 Samuel says 7 years of famine. 1 Chronicle says 3.
In 2 Samuel 24:13, the prophet Gad offers King David a choice of divine punishment for his sin, including 7 years of famine, alongside options for 3 months of fleeing enemies or 3 days of plague.
2 Samuel says David killed 700 charioteers. 1 Chronicle says 7,000.
2 Samuel 10:18 mentions 700 charioteers, and 1 Chronicles 19:18 mentions 7,000 horsemen. These could be two different categories. And the two numbers, 700 and 7,000, are both round numbers. They're estimates, of course, which is how people tallied military numbers in those days.
Matthew says Jesus preached on a mountain. Luke says on a flat plain. Same sermon, different geography.
Jesus preached his sermons more than once, of course. He was an itinerant preacher who preached the same messages several times. One time he delivers this message on a mountain. The other time he delivers the same message on a plain.
Acts says Judas bought a field with the money. Matthew says the priests bought it after he died.
Well, of course, Judas couldn't have bought the field after he died, so obviously the field was bought with Judas's money.
If this book was perfect, we wouldn't have to keep making lists like this.
It is a perfect book, but to quote John Lennox, it would be a pity if, in a desire rightly to treat the Bible as more than a book, we ended up treating it as less than a book by not permitting it the range and use of language, order, and figures of speech that are or ought to be familiar to us from our ordinary experience of conversation and reading. After all, the book was written for us, not for God.